There's something you need to hear, and it might sting a little. You're not being blocked because you're unworthy. You're being blocked because you're clinging too hard. Wanting something deeply isn't the issue. Needing it to feel complete? That's where it starts to break you. And I know that lands heavy because we've all been there. That place where you give everything, staying up at night, wondering why the thing you're pouring your heart into just doesn't arrive. And somehow, the more you yearn for it, the further it slips away. You tell yourself, if I just get this one thing, then I'll finally feel okay. But that kind of need, it's dangerous. It distorts your energy, clouds your thoughts, and whispers this lie, that your peace is hiding on the other side of a relationship, a promotion, a moment that hasn't arrived yet. But here's a truth. The Stoics taught long ago, need is the enemy of freedom. Epictetus said, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. And real freedom doesn't come from having it all. It comes from needing less. When you loosen your grip, when you detach your value from outcomes, the pressure breaks, and you're not desperate for life to validate you anymore. You start evolving, becoming someone who naturally draws in what fits. So stay with me, because in this video, I'll walk you through why less need brings greater alignment, and how to make that shift without dimming your ambition. We're not abandoning our goals. We're releasing the fear that's been caging them. And if this resonates with that part of you that's been quietly struggling to feel enough, do me a simple favor, hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps, and it lets me keep putting these messages out. Messages that bring us back to what's real. Now, let's begin. This doesn't start with desperation. It starts with desire. You want something with your heart, a relationship that feels safe, a job that honors your effort, a moment that tells you, yes, this is where you belong. That wanting, it's not wrong, it's human, it's the fuel behind every dream. But sometimes, silently, subtly, that desire crosses a line. What once inspired you begins to own you. And suddenly, you're not walking toward a dream. You're chasing it, fueled by the fear that without it, you'll fall apart. You stop asking life for opportunity and start begging it to fix you. And the tighter you hold, the more things slip away. Carl Jung once said, what you resist not only persists but will grow in size. And that's what need does. It builds resistance. Not just outside you, but within you. You become stiff, reactive, drained. Not because your dream is unrealistic, but because your attachment is building walls. There's a paradox here. Nothing that truly belongs can enter through anxious force. Peaceful alignment never arrives through panic. It arrives quietly, in the spaces of stillness. And what's for you won't require you to clench your fists. It stays. Not because you chase it, but because you're ready to hold it gently. But when you're lost in need, calm is the first casualty. You overthink silences, analyze every pause. You stop listening to your life and start interrogating it. In that noise, you lose your guiding star, clarity. Plato once said, the first and best victory is to conquer yourself. But how do you conquer yourself when you're enslaved by lack? That's the danger of need. It blinds you not just to what you already have, but to who you already are. You could be surrounded by love, by possibility, by opportunities whispering yes. But if your focus is on what's missing, you won't feel a single one. It becomes a loop. You think peace lies ahead, so you run harder. But the running just reminds you that you're still empty. And even when you finally get it, the job, the yes, the person, you can't relax. You're too afraid to lose it. You don't feel worthy enough to keep it. That's the twist. Need makes you feel unsafe even when you win. So what's the exit? You start by releasing your grip, not quitting, not going numb, but dropping the story that says you need something else to be complete. Socrates once said, he who is not content with what he is would not be content with what he would like to have. Contentment isn't giving up. It's strength. It creates space for what's true to arrive. When you stop chasing, you begin inviting. When you stop gripping, you start receiving. Calm energy doesn't make you passive. It makes you unbreakable. You respond from trust, not fear. And that's where everything begins to shift. As Aristotle said, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And when you see how your own need built your own prison, you also see the door. The door is presence. It's surrendering control without losing vision. You still want love, but you stop confusing attention with affection. You still dream, but you don't tie your worth to the timeline. And in that inner openness, life changes, not because you demand more, but because you finally made room for it, room for what's meant. Room for joy without conditions, room for stillness that feels safe. The less you need, the more you receive, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally remembered you were whole all along. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." And when you're moving from a place of need, what you're really responding to isn't always the surface desire, but a deeper wound. You think it's the job, the relationship, the praise you're after. But what you're truly longing for is inner peace, stability, a sense of worth. And so, when the outside thing finally shows up, it can't really fulfill you, because you're still asking it to heal something it was never designed to fix. And this is where it gets even harder to face. When you cling to an outcome, when you try to script every moment, you turn what could have been a gift into a source of pressure. What once felt like a miracle now feels like a trap. The joy turns to stress. The gratitude turns to expectation. You're not resting in the moment. You're bracing yourself, and the pattern keeps repeating. Not because you're undeserving, but because you haven't yet learned how to receive without fear. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And that isn't just philosophy, it's survival. When you pause to see how much of your anxiety comes from fear of losing what you gain, you start to notice how much of life you're missing trying to hold it tight. You weren't born to chase experiences and cage them. You were made to live them, to feel them, to let them flow. And that can only happen when you no longer need them to complete you. True receiving comes from a place of grounding, from trust, from knowing I am enough, with or without this. When you arrive there, everything changes. You no longer need to grip the outcome because you've become steady enough to handle whatever comes. The gift feels lighter. The moment feels fuller. You stop clinging to experiences. You begin welcoming them, and you know how to let them go without collapsing. Plato said, "The greatest wealth is to live content with little." And that doesn't mean you stop wanting. It means you stop building your self-worth on what arrives. You find your roots inside, and when something beautiful enters your life, you hold it with care, not with need. You honor it, but you don't lose yourself in it. And from that place, the right things stay. Not because you gripped harder, but because you no longer had to. So what can you do? You stop clutching, stop chasing, stop treating every glimpse of possibility like it's your last chance at peace. Instead, you open your hands, you breathe. You let the moment be what it is, without rushing to control the next. Because here's a truth most never hear. The less you need, the more life can actually deliver. Not because life becomes kinder, but because you become more available. There's no longer that wall of tension blocking what's trying to find you. And this isn't about pretending you don't care. It's not about giving up or being numb. It's about releasing that old script that says, if I don't have this, I'm not enough. Or if this doesn't happen, I'll break. Carl Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. That's the pivot. You stop attaching your peace to things that shift, to people who can leave, to plans that fall through. You stop asking the world to validate your worth. And when that old story finally breaks, something powerful emerges. You become magnetic. Not because you're pushing harder, but because you're not resisting anymore. You stop begging life to give you what you've been all along, whole, worthy, enough. And that kind of presence, it's rare. It doesn't force. It doesn't chase. It simply welcomes. You walk through life without demanding it notice you. You stop forcing doors open. You stop knocking on windows that were never yours to begin with. And then life starts to move toward you. The people who see your depth. The opportunities that match your peace. The experiences that feel like alignment, not survival. Aristotle once said, happiness depends upon ourselves, and that becomes undeniable. You're no longer waiting for life to grant you permission. You're not looking for a sign to believe. You're moving through life like someone who already knows who they are. And that is where your power is, not in how loudly you speak, but in how still you stand when everything else goes quiet. Letting go of need doesn't weaken you. It grounds you. It returns your worth to where it always belonged, within. And from that foundation, you don't just attract more. You receive it. You enjoy it. You hold it without fear. Plato once said, the measure of a man is what he does with power. And I'd add this, real power is when you need nothing to prove it. That's the shift. When life finally starts to respond, not to your struggle, but to your stillness. Aristotle once said that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And when you finally begin to know yourself truly, you no longer create from a place of lack. You start creating from love, from wholeness, and anything built from that foundation doesn't just appear, it endures. We've been conditioned to grind, to hustle, to push until it hurts. The world tells you again and again, success belongs to the ones who outwork everyone else. And yes, discipline matters, effort matters. But at a certain point, all that pressure, the constant push to make it happen, starts to turn on you. You're moving, yes, but not from trust, from tension, and it shows. What if the shift isn't in doing more? What if it's in doing less, but from the right energy? Less overthinking, less proving, less shaping yourself to win approval. You don't even notice how much energy you spend just trying to earn a place you already deserve. You perform in conversations, replay moments in your head. Edit yourself in real time. That's what need does. It silently robs you of presence. And when presence is gone, so is your power. Socrates said, to find yourself, think for yourself. But when you're trapped in a loop of needing to be seen, validated, or accepted, you start thinking like everyone but you. You live as a version that makes others comfortable while your truth collects dust. But something changes when you let go of that need to perform. You begin to show up differently. You speak less, but every word lands. You move slower, but your steps align. You're no longer chasing connection, yet people feel drawn to you. That's not coincidence, that's presence. And presence, it doesn't shout, it doesn't try to prove, it just is. Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you can't become that if you keep shapeshifting into what others expect. When you stop needing to be seen, ironically, that's when you start being noticed. People feel that difference. You're calm, you're center. You don't rush to fill gaps. You don't flinch when plans shift. Your energy isn't leaking from lack anymore. You walk in peace. You don't need to explain yourself. Your stillness does that for you, not because you're trying to impress, but because you're no longer impressed by the show. You're present. You're real. And that presence says something louder than any word ever could. I'm not here to prove. I'm here to be. Aristotle said, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work, but that pleasure vanishes when every step is just a means to an end. When you're chasing results, you forget to live inside the process. But when you let go of that outcome obsession, the process returns to you. You don't just grow, you start to love growing. And the version of you that shows up, the one that's not grasping, not hiding, that version, that's power. Not because they do more, but because they stopped doing what was never theirs to carry. How many times have you said yes when your soul whispered no, not out of desire, but out of fear? Of disappointing, of being left, of starting over. You stayed too long, in rooms that drained you, in relationships that expired years ago, not because they fed you, but because the thought of empty felt worse than the reality of starving. You replied to texts that made you shrink. You called half-hearted apologies effort. You gave energy to people who only gave you their spare time. And still, you told yourself, this is better than nothing. You settled, not just once, but again and again, for jobs that killed your fire, for affection that came with conditions, for love that kept you guessing, and deep down, you knew you deserved more. But need is sneaky. It wears masks. It dresses up as logic, as patience, as reality. It tells you that settling is survival, that holding on is courage, that half is safer than none. But here's the truth. The less you need, the more you see. And when you finally make space to breathe, you realize you never lacked options. You just lacked belief. Carl Jung said, "We don't solve our problems, we outgrow them." And that growth, it happens not when you're stuck in fear, but when you finally stop letting fear dictate what you'll accept. As need falls, clarity rises. Not because you become cold, but because you finally feel safe enough to be still. You're no longer led by panic, you're led by peace. And from that place, the world looks different. What once felt like opportunity now feels like compromise. What once looked like love now feels like uncertainty. You start to see the difference between what your fear begged for and what your peace has been waiting for. Plato said, "The beginning is the most important part of the work." And that new beginning, it starts when you say, "I'm done settling just because it's there. I'm ready to wait for what's right." You choose stillness over noise, truth over comfort, wholeness over attention. Because the moment you stop accepting scraps, you start expecting meals. You raise your standards, not out of arrogance, but out of alignment. And what's meant for you, truly meant, won't require you to shrink to receive it. Detachment isn't giving up. It's remembering that you're complete regardless of the outcome. And when you stop tying your peace to things you can't control, you become calm, not cold, clear, not careless. And that calm clarity, it attracts everything that panic couldn't. You stop begging, stop pushing. You make room, not for the things that drain you, but for the ones that rise to meet your peace. You no longer have to convince anyone of your worth. You've left that game entirely. You're not obsessed with timelines or closure or approval. You've made peace with the unfolding, and that's not weakness. That's strength. Jung said, "Even a happy life has its darkness." And peace isn't about perfect conditions. It's about balance. Stillness in the unknown, and in that stillness you become available, not desperate. Available for what's real, for love that feels like home, for friendships that refill you, for decisions that let you sleep at night. And that availability that changes everything. You're no longer searching, you're no longer scanning, you're already whole, and because of that, you're no longer in your own way. The struggle stops, the tension breaks. Plato said, "The greatest wealth is to live content with little, and while the world demands more, you've found something greater. A return to self, a joy not in what arrives, but in how you hold yourself while you wait. And that's when life begins to flow. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped fighting it. And what happens when you let go of need? You don't end up with less. You end up receiving more. Not because you begged, but because you trusted. You sat with the unknown without fixing it. You stopped chasing what was never choosing you, and in that stillness you heard something. The truth, you were whole all along. Beneath all that trying, that gripping, that noise, was you, the steady you, the grounded you. And that's who life has been looking for. Not the one who clings, not the one who performs, but the one who says, if it's meant for me, it will come. If it's not, I'll still be whole. And that kind of energy, it doesn't shout, it doesn't struggle, it trusts, it waits, it attracts. Socrates said, "The secret of change is to focus not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And when you release the need, that's exactly what you begin to do. You stop fighting, stop resisting. You start building, and life finally begins to build with you."